Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening or morning, depending on where you are. I'm Kendra from WildChina, here to introduce our UCCA hosts. We have curator Luan Shixuan and assistant curator Neil Zhang, who will lead us through the Meditations in an Emergency exhibition at UCCA in Beijing, where you can see that they are right now. So before we start, I'd also like to briefly mention our 2021 Art Basel Tour in partnership with the House Collective, which you may have seen in the pre-event slideshow. If you're interested in learning more, please email us at info@wildchina.com. And now, with no further ado, I'll give Luan Shixuan and Neil Zhang the spotlight. Enjoy and thanks for joining us.
Hi everyone. Hi, I'm Neil.
I'm Shixuan.
I'm the assistant curator of UCCA.
I'm also the curator here. We're happy to give you guys a virtual tour.
Yes. So should we start with UCCA a little bit?
Or is there a presentation?
Yeah, let's just start with UCCA.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're standing in the lobby facing this wall painting that the artist Xiu Zhijie did 1 year ago, more than 1 year ago actually. So we were founded back in 2008. So there's a 12 years, almost 13 years history of showing and curating and studying contemporary art. So, and we underwent renovation last year. So the museum you're seeing now is completely different from what it used to be. This building is actually a pretty old factory hall that was built back in the 60s by a group of German engineers. So, and in the early 2000s, our founders, Guy and Mimi Woolens, they decided to, they were longtime collector for Chinese contemporary art, and they decided to found a museum and give back to the Chinese contemporary art community. So that's how everything started. And they renovated the whole factory hall into a contemporary art museum. So yeah, and this wall painting is very interesting.
Yeah, maybe we should take a closer look.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's basically a map of the contemporary art scene today.
Yeah. So basically, the history of how Chinese contemporary art started from back in the 80s. And I think it has a pretty special meaning that the map is here on our wall because we are the observer or like the
Participants of
the
this map.
player of
Yes.
what's happening here in China.
So basically on this map, there's lots of elements. Like on the left side, you can see art museum, foundation, art history, all those like elements that constitute the whole contemporary art scene. And it's a really interesting map. It's also the way like Xiu Zhijie, he working with like those ideas and concepts.
Mm-hmm. And so this is basically what we commissioned him to do for after our renovation. So it's sort of like the inaugural show of the new UCCA. So basically this year is pretty special. Everybody knows, but we usually do like 8 or 10 shows a year. And we have a very big gallery hall that we're going to go into later, and then 2 mid-size galleries in the front. So we do 2 or 3 bigger shows every year. This year we're going to go into Meditations for Emergency, and last year we did Matthew Barney and a huge Picasso show. I'm sure maybe some of you guys have heard of. And we also do a lot of mid-sized shows for artists who are like group shows also. We just opened a mid-sized show for the American painter Elizabeth Peyton. And yeah, So that's what's been happening basically the first half of the year.
Right.
So it's pretty, yeah. Should we?
Yeah, should we just move on to the show? Like Shushun just said, this is a very special year, so that's why we have this meditation and emergency exhibition. I think maybe we should start with the title, Meditation of Emergency. I think, the idea is twofold. Like Shushun said, we do a exhibition throughout the year, and normally the preparation time for exhibition is around 2 years, and maybe the museum even longer. Like museums in New York, they would do like 5 years preparation. So for this show, the reason why we only use about like 6 to 8 weeks to prepare for this whole show, from like generating an idea to really like open the show, only for 8 weeks. So I remember like back in March, like every day, me, Shushu, and other team member, we doing this like daily meeting, brainstorming. So we're really under lots of pressure, and it is an emergency for us as a staff member in the museum, and also like for director and Felix Nari, we found this like phrase like meditation emergency from Frank O'Hara's poem.
Who is the creator at MoMA back in the 60s.
Back in the 60s, yes.
So, and he's also a poet. We actually have one of his
books. Yes.
Yeah. So it's basically a pretty good summary of what we're trying to do here, because when we were organizing this show, the whole country, or like at least Beijing, was still under semi-lockdown, and
right.
We didn't really know what's gonna happen basically later this year, and but then we decided that we need to do something as a response to what is happening here, because it's just such a rare opportunity for contemporary art to do that, because I find it always, it's almost always like when you're seeing this kind of essay-like exhibition, it's always sort of a retrospective of something. You're always looking back of what happened in the past. And I feel like this is basically the first time that we can give sort of like a real-time reaction to what is happening now. So like the exhibition is almost ending. We still have a week, but
still the emergency still like like in Europe, American, many countries still under the emergency state. So
exactly.
Yeah, so for the show we have 5 chapters. Each chapter is sort of our response to this emergency, and we just really hope audience, the visitor, that can come to UCCA with some questions in their mind, like thinking about what's emergency and what does emergency mean to us. And also for artists, we have 27 artists, I believe.
26.
Oh, 26. 26 artists, and some of them are from China, or Chinese artists. They have like overseas backgrounds, and we also have like French artists, American artists.
Across nationalities.
Yeah, across nationality and gender.
Generations and gender, basically.
Right, because we really think this issue is not only for China or Chinese artists, it's for everybody.
Exactly. We're just, we want to offer this for the audience as a place to basically rethink and restart, as the museum reopened back in May, because we were sort of closed down for half a year. So it's a pretty special show for us. I'm gonna start talking about the first chapter. So the first chapter is actually the starting point of how we generated the whole idea and the structure of the show. So it's called The Fragile Everyday. But originally we were gonna call it The Disappearing Everyday, and it's just what we experienced from the pandemic, because everything is disrupted, and including your daily routine, because for everyone here or around the world, the most important matter that people think about is just life and death. So you gotta rethink who has the ownership of your daily life. Like, what's the meaning of the quotidian? So that's basically the starting point of what this chapter wants to talk about. So we picked 5 artists for this chapter, and what we're looking at now here in the LED screen is a work done by the artist Qiu Anxiong, who is based in Shanghai now. So his works basically spans all kinds of different media, including installation, painting, video, animation that we're looking at. But this is basically his most prominent works, which is the ink animation. So this work is called The New Classic Mountains and Seas. It was inspired by this ancient novel, ancient Chinese novel, which is called The Classic Mountains and Seas. And it has a lot to do with the mythological geology and animals and beasts and those kind of things. So this is actually a trilogy. This is the third one of the trilogy. And the first 2 were actually focusing on the biotech and the aeronautic tech and what it does to our lives. And the artist is imagining the future possibilities with the, or like with the, with the development of the technology and what it does to our life and how it influences us. But the third one is actually talking about how internet is changing our lives. And it was made before the pandemic, but I just find it very much resemble our lives during the pandemic, because as you can see, you can see from the video later, there's this really weird, surreal cityscape, and you can see like the monitors, sort of like animal-like figures, and you can see the people wearing the octopus mask. So it was supposed to be a very surreal imagination of the future, but somehow just in 2 years, it became our reality. So I feel like that's a very good start of the show, and that's why it's here. Should we go move inside?
Sure. Yeah, so let's dive into the show. So the tourism piece is belongs to chapter 1, and in this area, it actually both section 1 and 2.
And you can see, we basically need to do a very comprehensive design for each show, and all the structure is temporary because the space is so vast. So all the galleries here are temporarily built. Okay. So I want to start talking about these 4 paintings first. Okay, so let's start here. So the artist is called Zhang Hui, and he has a very long ago, but actually he's graduated from the Central. So all of his paintings and his works has theatrical is a very big element in his works. So for the show, we picked 4 paintings from 2 different series, and they were created in different times, but I just find the pairing very interesting because, as you can see, these two is called Blueprint series. These two actually, the image was taken or it was inspired by the China airline, their advertisement, and the undertone is pretty cheerful. As you can see, the flight attendant and the happy customer because they're about to embarking on the trip, and it's very exciting, and which is pretty funny to look at during the pandemic because all travel was banned, and it's kind of ironic to see that. And these two, the nurses here, is called Just Like in the Mirror, and I'm choosing these two because I find there's something very interesting. There's something very interesting is what these two professions have in common is that they all have a certain kind of performativity in what they do for their job. Like for the flight attendants and for the nurses, I feel like what they do is like to provide a sense of safety for their patients or for their customers because it's all like in the plane it's all in like very sealed space and you have and in the hospital you have very little control of your life and where you are or your health, and what they do help you to ease that kind of anxiety. And these two has a sort of like somber undertone. I just find it very the contrast pretty interesting. And we can also talk a little bit about these. So this is a young Taiwanese artist who graduated from Berlin and he's still based there. He's basically sort of like a stage name. So we picked 2 groups of work here, and this is called the Alp. It's what he did when he did his residency in Switzerland. And as you can see from the screens here, this young man basically has trouble falling asleep, and then he picked out all these impossible places, like in the supermarket or on the mountain range, or when there's forest running around, and there's you can see the IKEA bed in all these impossible places, and he's just trying to sleep, and it just shows a tremendous sense of anxiety here, and I feel like that is very much something that we can relate to when uh, when we are in crisis and when we are experiencing great anxiety. And as you can see, there's an installation here. It was shown in Shanghai PSA before. So we got an actual IKEA bed and the like 5 meters high structure and with the lamppost shining on you, so there's no possibility for you to fall asleep. And then there's the other piece that he did. So the artist was dressing in shorts, and he's actually jogging sort of as itself. It's a pretty funny piece. Sort of, he's basically doing this sort of like a resistance to the systems of consumption. So as you can see, he deals with a lot of subjects that relate to everyday life, and in a very satire, ironic way.
Okay. Maybe I think the jumping lead one is fine. Yeah. Because there's a live on the table. Yeah, so we're going to move into section 2. And the first piece is a sculpture piece by this Chinese video artist, Zhang Wei.
He's definitely a pretty pivotal artist in the Chinese contemporary art history. But first of all, let me give you a brief introduction of the second chapter, which is called Vital Signs. Originally, we were going to call it above 37 degrees.
37.2.
Yeah. So because that's so that's like how you're decided if you're sick or not, like during the
Have a fever.
during the pandemic. So it's a pretty funny signal. It's just a number, but during the pandemic, it means something different. So the second chapter is pretty obvious and important because, as you can see, the pandemic is definitely a very big reminder of your own mortality, that you can die like anytime basically, or you can get sick, and you can get people around you sick without even knowing sometimes. And during the pandemic, we're all thinking about how some groups of people are very, very vulnerable, and some are not. Maybe they can hide safely somewhere else. It's just sort of a very good opportunity for us to rethink the biopolitics and to look back and to think what the pandemic has brought us into thinking. So let's get into the first gallery. So if you know something about Chinese contemporary art history, then you probably have already described as the godfather of video art in China, but it's sort of like. So what we're showing here is a new group of pieces that he just did last year. And the skeleton here is himself, basically. So he got very interested in all the new medical technology and how everything is developing. So he subjected himself to a MRI to do like a full body scan of his skeleton. And then he had all the skeleton remade in Italy using marble, and then have hired a bunch of sculptors to do the work afterwards. So that's what we're looking at. And then the second series of work is called Volume of Blood, Water, and Fat. So what we're seeing here, you see this square-shaped sculpture is actually has the same weight of water, blood, and fat, and the artist's body. So that's what it's pretty funny, and I think it also shows kind of a turn of his artistic career, because earlier in his career he did all these video pieces that concerns everyday activity like rinsing, washing. He had this piece of himself repeatedly washing a chicken. And basically just to question the meaning of these everyday activities. But he is now moving into a pretty visual stage of his work. Should we talk about Li Liao?
Yeah, that was fun. So that's the last piece in for section 2.
This is a very funny presentation of this artist Li Yao, who does a lot of performing art, more like something with performing elements. And what we're seeing here, so this tape is a work called 8 Things Every Day. As you can see, things that are marked, sorry, they're all in Chinese, but the things that are marked is that he just continued to study English and to go to the gym every day for a year because he thinks that or he's the alter ego in this work, thinks that in order to be a better man or to be a middle class, you have to speak perfect English and you have to have six packs. So that's what he continued to do. And
That's the artist himself.
yep. So that this piece is called "To Be a Better Man," and as you can see, he got the 6 packs, and the whole video is himself constantly or like repeating or reciting the text from this English textbook that basically all of younger younger Chinese who have encountered this textbook, new concept English, one way or another, and so it's sort of like a symbol of how you improve your English, and that's what the artist did.
It's really funny because so during the opening I asked the artist himself, so after a year's practicing English, so is your English getting better or not? And his answer is no.
The whole thing is just it's a satire of how society works, basically. It's a pretty capitalist way of categorizing people because, if you speak perfect English and you have 6 packs, you must be a pretty good man. But of course it's not, because these two things can't possibly solve any big problems of your life. And I think that's what he was trying to say. This is a sculpture of 6 packs and the new concept English and the notebook that he was using when he was studying English.
Yeah, so basically this is a 3D scan. 3D scan of the artist's body himself.
Let's give a quick introduction of this young artist, Mika Rottenberg. So he is also trapped in America during the pandemic. And what we're showing here is a semi-waiting room in the hospital, but it's not, because as you can see, this door-like sculptures and the stairs, they're all in different places and the functionality of them is cancelled. And the centerpiece of this presentation are the photographs that the artist took. It all started from his own health crisis that happened 2 years ago. He just developed this impossible rash that there's no way of knowing why it happened. And that's why he started to think about disease and Chinese medicine. We can see a lot of the model for acupuncture. And that's the artist himself. Yeah, he's also using this set of photographs to talk relationship between animal and human being, which is what we're gonna start talking about.
Great. So we're actually looking into chapter 3. And one thing I like to say is that even though we have 5 different chapters and they seem to be like independent, but they actually have a connection between all those 5 chapters. So like the Li Liao piece we just saw is, it's about the body, it's about like Li Liao train his body to have a 6-pack. And we're right now at section 3 is called Beyond Animality. And one key word in this chapter, I think, is, of course, it's about animality, but also one concept or one notion in philosophy is called human centrism. So the 5 artists in this chapter, they're all very concerned or they're aware of this concept, and they try to, bring people's attention to this, why humans are so centric today. And so on my in front of me, this is the first piece of the chapter. It's by a Chinese artist, Tong Yixin, and title of the piece is called Poem in the Mount Luzu. So Tong Yixin, he was born in Lushan and currently in New York. And Lushan is his hometown, and there is a zoo in Lushan. It was founded in the 70s. So in 2015, Tong Yixin started return to his hometown, and he realized one thing is Lushan Zoo is being abandoned. So all the animals have been transported to a different zoo, or they're just died in the zoo. And because this is a quite important zoo back then, and they used to have a panda in the zoo, so show you an idea how important this zoo is. So back then it was quite important zoo. So they actually have an architect to design the house for each type of animal. And so there's a 10 video, and each video is corresponds to one type of animal's housing. So Tong Yixin returned to the zoo in 2015 and realized one thing is that, first of all, I just said it's abandoned, and then he realized some humans, they're actually moving into those animals' houses. And so Tong Yixin, he documented all those spaces and also the traces that humans are actually inside. And if you notice, there is the monitor, the TV is mounted on the back of this structure, and there's almost like a hole. And so this structure is actually Tong Yixin, the artist, he inspired by one of the scene have been into. So he realized because the architecture is designed for animal, so there are actually no windows on this, and to prevent the animal escape from the structure. But for the human need to have a window. So lots of people who move into those space, they just create a window themselves. They just curve from the wall to make themselves a window.
好漂亮，养在狗叫的狮子。
Relationship between animal, human, and the structure, the architecture is fascinating. Let's move along. So on the left side and the right side is 2 video pieces. From left is by Oliver Larry, a European artist based in Berlin. On the right side is Pierre Wee, the French artist based in New York. And maybe let's take a look at Oliver Larry because it's quite short. And so Oliver Larry, he's been working with digital technology rendering, and I think one thing I'd like to say is that he never creates something himself. He only copying or scanning object in the reality. So Oliver, most of his work is sculpture. It's 3D scanned sculpture and printed. And those 2 pieces actually belong to one trilogy. So this is one, currently playing one is the second, and the third one he's still making it. The reason I really like about this piece is that, so Oliver, he's not like other contemporaries, he's not really into theory. He doesn't really read a lot of philosophers' book, but he just has this really spontaneous feeling towards everything. Like Oliver said to me, he thinks that one day he was drinking with friends and he had this argument with his friend because he believed everything, all the living beings, they have some sort of connection. And even with with an object, like human with a chair, with things, with something that's not organic. So that's his motivation, and he started making this whole piece. And this one's just just over. So supposedly, okay, this one's done. Perfect. So this is the first video piece. It's Untitled, and maybe I just let it play for a little bit. So. Yeah, so because of the artist, he lived in Japan for a while, for 2 years when he was a kid. So, you know, he had this interest in animation. So the first piece, he sort of just into like using all those characters from like, you know, I think there's animation from people based here in Japan, China, like Journey to the West, COT, also Disney characters. They're just transforming, keep transforming one thing to another, from an animal to a beast, from beast to like a human. So they just keep transforming, and that's, you know, this whole meaning. So, and also I like to point out is the music. So Oliver, he picked this music with a minor sense key. The minor sense key in classical music is often used to portray a irresolvable relationship, some sort of melancholy. So with this sense of sadness, I think for me at least, I started thinking why and what's the connection between all those things, and either like a hierarchy between them. And maybe the last piece I would like to say, let's do this by Singaporean artist Robert Renhui Zhao. He's a photographer and he does lots of photo work. For this piece, it's titled the Last Cat on Christmas Island. So Christmas Island is actual island on the north side of Australia, and it was discovered in 17th century because like people start to move into the island with their pets, like namely cats in this case. So because of the cat, the island doesn't really have cat before humans start moving in. So cats has become a problem for the island because there's really cat that can just, you know, live and forever. So the government is started having this control on the cat. What they try to do is, since early 2000, they try to eradicate all the cat from the island. So Robert, the artist, he started to notice, you know, this killing towards the cat, the murder, and he documents the whole process from the very beginning, like how they kill the cat, and those are 2 cats, like he found in the wild. And Robert, the artist, he realized something very interesting about this logic behind this killing, is that humans, they tend to believe that to bring this island back into the history, in one point, that's a balance. That's a habitat of the animal back then, and it should be forever. So they're using this as a excuse to kill all the cats. The same rule also applies to human, because human also doesn't really belong to the island. So human really, they put themselves outside of their own logic and start to putting cat on the spot and as a excuse to kill all of them. And so that's the section 3. And now we're moving into section 4. Section 4 is the title Other Movements. So it's really about migration, about the idea of war, the boundaries, frontier. Like in the first piece by Taiwanese artist Joyce O. To some safety hazards, so we tend to let it still like that. So there's been lots of research have been done on the concept of war, between the water America and Mexico, they're still under construction, all those walls. But the research says that, the physical wall that doesn't really preventing, the people move like between the walls around the border. And those physical walls, actually they have this symbolic value over than, these actually function. So I think Joyce Ho, this piece is very interesting. It just shows you how unstable the wall is. It's so flimsy. You can just push it and it just comes around. And the next piece is by American artist Christopher Ho, and they both last name is Ho, but they have no connection. And the title of the piece is called CXAA. It's actually a flight between Vancouver and Hong Kong. Chris, he was born in Hong Kong, but he moved to US when he was 3-year-old. So when he was a teenager, he often traveled back and forth between US and Hong Kong. And CXAA is a flight he often takes during the summertime. And very interestingly, back then in the 80s and 70s, CXAA, they will make one stop in Honolulu, Hawaii. So every summer, Chris, he will fly from Vancouver to Honolulu, spend some time with his family, and then they all travel back to Hong Kong. So Chris, I think one thing about Christopher Ho's work is that he's extremely subtle, and he always combines his own personal history with this broader geopolitics conflict. And as you can see, we have those dock chairs, and according to Chris, those chairs remind him of the business class in Cathay Pacific flights back then. And also because of the summertime, he spent lots of time on the beach. So it's like the beach chair, just without the umbrella. So, and also we can see on this pedestal, there is lots of family picture of Chris and himself, and those rocks are actually his grandfather's collection. Yeah, so family picture, and even the shape of this pedestal. So, traditionally pedestal is just like a cube. But Christopher Ho, he actually made those pedestals. Looks like the cut on the flight. So lots of interesting little details, inside of Chris. So this is Mika Rottenberg. Mika is American artist, originally from Israel, I believe, and he got his MFA from Columbia University in early 2000s. And this is a very interesting video piece. I think this is most viewed video piece in this exhibition. Yeah, one thing is that because of this pandemic, so it's impossible during March to ship things around, and it's impossible for us for a museum to get foreign artists' work from overseas. So that's why we have lots of video work in this exhibition. And yeah, apparently this is the most viewed video work in the show. So, and we're just approaching the last chapter. Yeah, it's actually so great to see that we have so many visitors come to UCCA today. I have been really missing this thing. And the last chapter, it's titled Autofocus, is really about this current situation about information, about someone's contribution, the fake news, the word is being circling around the globe. So maybe one piece can exemplify this chapter very well is in front of us. It's by a Shanghai-based artist, Pei. The piece is very interesting. So basically the artist, he wrote the program himself. And the program is like a plugin to a browser. So I think the browser he's using is a Chrome, the browser by Google. So it's a plugin for the browser, and he can enter a word into his program. And the program is able to run 24 hours, and it can get all the information related to the word he entered. I think for this expression, he entered what is a pandemic. So on the left side is in English, and the right side is in Chinese. So it is enormous amounts of information in front of you. So because it is, nowadays, I think for most of us, our knowledge is really based on, what internet tells us. So it's quite interesting to do for PN. I think he did a survey into this, cyberspace. So what's out there? And one thing I found is really funny is that there's lots of information is actually have nothing to do with the pandemic. There's some game and there's some random information is rarely like one sentence have a connection. And also we do have a laptop right here to run the program, so people can really see how this is almost like we're browsing throughout the internet. Is so basically this program just did what we did every day, but much more faster and constantly 24 hours. So I think that's the highlight of the show from chapter 1 to 5. Yeah. Anything you want to add, Shushan?
Unless if you guys want to take a quick scan of the Beijing show, I think that's about it.
Quick, really? We do have around 15 minutes.
Do you guys want to take a look, or is that?
Yeah, we have another show actually just opened. It's created by Shushan, the great creator of this.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Beijing show is also quite interesting. Yeah.
The show is actually, we covered it with the National Portrait Gallery in London, so we have to give a pretty comprehensive presentation or introduction of her work. So we can see from the first important work, the first short work that she did back in the 90s, and to the new work that she created earlier this year. We included all of that. So the work I was referring to is this one. It's called Napoleon. And so she graduated from SBA in New York back in 1987, and she took several years of pretty struggle of time to make with her career, and even the question of whether she wants to be a full-time artist or she wants to get a job. So during that time, she was reading a lot of literature, and this one is actually a book written by English historian Patricia Cronin. It's a biography of Napoleon. So she basically copied the cover of this book because she thinks this book changed her life. And that's when she realized that a person can really change the world, and she intends to study these characters and their personality and how they became who they are using painting. So, yeah. And she also painted a lot of artists and musicians starting from the 90s because she was a huge music fan since she was a teenager, and she listened to a lot of rock music when she was very young. And in 1994, because Kurt Cobain committed suicide, that sort of triggered her basically to start painting and studying these musicians and how they became who they are instead of just, a troubled kid. They find a way to express themselves and to create something, and finally they become these great artists that change the whole world. And they're still changing young people today. And this is a frontman of a Finnish band called Ice Age, and I believe he's also a friend of Elizabeth. So Elias, David Bowie, and Julian Casablancas, these are all the important musicians that she painted over and over during the years. work. It's called Eternal Return that the artist did earlier this year, and you can see how she recreates basically the classical paintings, like this one, her base about two women, and she cropped just a part of the painting. And I'd like to talk a little bit about how she paints, because as you can see from the edges here of the painting, she usually applies gesso on the, whether it's panel or like whatever that she's painting on, or linen. And then the gesso will give it sort of like marble quality, and so that the paint won't hold on to it so quickly or so much. So you can see that very clearly of her brushwork, and then the paint has a sort of translucent quality on the canvas. So I think that's a pretty important element of her style and how she paints. And of course, she also does a lot of monotypes, like this one. So she has to apply paint onto a glass very quickly, and then print on this paper before the paint dries. So monotypes for her is a very different kind of process. And this one, she was painting a scene from Wagner's opera. She started studying opera 10 years ago, basically, and she painted a lot of the scenes from Wagner's opera and some performer tenors that she thinks are very great artists, like Jonas Kaufmann and Placido Domingo, etc.
I have a question. So seems like this gallery is a lot more wider than the
first
one.
Yeah.
Is there a reason behind that?
Yeah, definitely. So like we have actually different kinds of standards for different types of work. So for is as bread, or like the works on paper, we have to use like sort of not so strong to just protect the work. But the paintings we can use stronger. As you can see, this wall is really high. This is also a scene of Wagner's opera performed by Jonas Kaufmann, and a painting of Matthew Barney, who we did a big solo show of last year. And, Twilight, everybody is familiar with this image. So yeah, that's a pretty brief tour of the painting show.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess that's end of the tour. Yeah.
Thank you guys for watching.
watching.
We're really happy to give you an introduction of UCCA and our exhibition.
Of course, and hope see you guys in person at UCCA.
Yeah, welcome. Whenever things ease up. Which we don't.